Welcome to the Taos Institute's Relational Research Network video series. In this series, we explore research from a relational perspective. We hear from people working with a relational research process and learn about related values, concepts, and practices. To start, here are some of our ideas. Research from a relational perspective embodies a philosophical and co-creative stance. It is thus not a method, per se, but rather a collaborative way of being. Engaging from this perspective entails an ethical responsiveness to a focus of inquiry. Recognizing that reality is created through language and social structures means it can also be recreated. Relational research is a process that is attentive to broader relations and interactions. The purpose is to expand possibilities and co-create transformative potentials. We hope you enjoy the series and invite you to join in the conversation. Gergen and Sheila McNamee, Conversation with Christine Bodiford. An invitation to conversations about constructionist practices in research. Ken Gergen is Senior Research Professor at Swarthmore College and founding member and president of the Taos Institute. Sheila McNamee is Professor of Communication at the University of New Hampshire and co-founder and vice president of the Taos Institute. In their conversation, Ken and Sheila explore a historical context of constructionist and relational practices in research and their ideas for the future. They invite the many voices of people who engage in research from a relational perspective to keep the conversation going, to share thinking about what counts as research in order to expand possibilities. They also invite us to consider how, by focusing on the relational, that work helps us to keep our humanity alive.
Sheila, what is relational research to you and me? Let me just say a couple of words and let's see, because I'll be interested in seeing your answer to this too. That
Sure.
I have to start at the kind of a more abstract level a little bit to say, look, all inquiry of any kind, or what we do in the social sciences, to me, I sort of looked at it as a constructionist and asked a couple of questions. What is it good for? Which is a pragmatic question. What are we trying to do? And secondly, reflective. That is the value question. What kind of world are we contributing to when we do that? Those are just broad questions. So then I turn to sort of a relational perspective, which I look at as one perspective. It's just a way of looking at the world. But it's one which I take, for me, find great nurturance in that, looking at it that way, and say, well, look, if we want to contribute to a world in which that relational process enriches us, in which we grow from it, in which we don't lead into conflict and degeneration, how would research look? What would it look like? What would be the practice? What would be the methods, if there were any? Just to keep asking that question from a value perspective and also from a pragmatic question. What, if you place relational richness in the forefront, what does it look like? Now that's where I enter in, and I don't know, that's pretty vague. We can.
It's not vague to me at all. I mean, I would say I start in the same place, and I'll just add to it. All research is relational. The question is, what kind of relationship are you constructing in the research? So, is it a subject object? I treat you as this distant thing to be surveyed and evaluated and judged and so forth. Or
already that epistemology already embeds it. I study you is already
exactly.
Every distinction, everything you do has some problem with it, but what are you willing to live with? And do we have to start there? I judge you. And
That's right.
maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we know that the overall dominant view of research is this subject-object, orientation, that kind of relationship. And so, starting from the premise that all research is relational, and then asking the question, what kind of relationship do we want to step into? Do we want to perpetuate? Do we want to continue? Sort of the pragmatic question that you're asking. Then we can say, okay, this thing that we are now calling relational research is a very different kind of relationship from the traditional dominant view of research in that distant kind of relationship,
I guess
right?
that's what I was trying to say when I said enriching relationships. That is
Yeah,
relations which don't lead in sort of a negative
yeah,
direction. Yeah.
exactly. So then, the question is, so all right, so what do we do? Where are we focusing? And I think historically, for me, in my life, very early in my career, I wrote this piece called "Research as Intervention," because I had been very influenced by my training as a systemic family therapist. Because my dissertation, I was interested in therapy and therapeutic process. So there, the term in those days, the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, dating myself, I suppose. Um, I was a very young PhD student. um, the word was intervention, and we don't use that word anymore.
Yeah.
But still, so historically, we've moved from that kind of notion because for me, I started thinking, well, researchers believe that they're discovering something, where practitioners, therapists, consultants think that they're changing something. And I really thought that researchers could take a lesson from the practitioners, from the therapists, consultants, and so forth, and really recognize that research is a process of change, of transformation. And so, for me, historically looking, research as intervention back in 1980 to today, I would think more about, broader movements like social activism or really asking the question that you're asking, you know, what is our research doing for people? And what else could it do, and who's it good for and who's it not good for, and really looking at the situated aspects of the research rather than thinking more in these broad, what has come to be understood in social sciences anyway as the premium form of research is a huge large end study where you're just kind of averaging out what most people do most of the time. So
Yeah, let me pick up on the idea of research as change
mm,
within that process. Because it does seem to me that the very way we do research is itself an act into a culture. So in that sense, it will shift something. It will accentuate. It will suppress. So all research is a form of change, but the question is, what is it a change for, and how rapid do you want to see that change take place? That is, you could have change that would be the research is published and it would be a slow process, perhaps, or not. We can come back to that. Or it could be a very active process in which you do research with others as an action research,
right.
and particularly with others, and then you accentuate the relational part. But the very doing of action research itself is like also communication. It's like saying,
Yeah.
this is a saying placing a good on that, which I'm willing to accept.
Yeah.
Um, let me go back for a moment because this is a bit of a pet thing, but the various aspects of doing research and where a relational stance takes you, what you begin paying attention to. And one of the pet peeves I've had is with the way in which most research within the social sciences is written in a way that most people can't read it.
Right.
So it's contained. It's a hermetic group to whom you're talking on already a sort of a privileged group who will talk about them.
Right.
So then the very way in which we communicate the research, the very way we sort of write, if writing is indeed what we want to do, already is at issue. And,
Exactly.
and it's controversial because if you don't write in a way which is acceptable within a scientific community, it's looked at as simplifying and so on. And that's a question that can you say what you want to say in a way that's important and can get to the people you hope really would be helped by that in some way.
Yeah, I mean, this raises the issue of ethics, in research, because honestly, if we're studying whatever the phenomenon is we're studying, we're hoping that it improves social life. And if the people who could benefit from that can't understand the way, the research is written up or presented, what's the point? So I think that that's the ethical issue, and then that invites in when we start thinking about how do we really speak to communities, to people with our research in a way that is meaningful and can have meaning in their lives. That invites all these innovative ways of thinking about research that have been completely off the table in the standard social scientific way. So, the arts-based research, looking at theater, looking at autoethnography, music, dance, performance. There are all sorts of ways. I remember being really impressed when I was a visiting professor in Brazil on a Sunday afternoon, walking through a beautiful park. And of course, parks everywhere, and that's what everyone does on Sunday. And there was a group of medical students putting on performances that showed, in a very humorous way, showed how to take care of a brand new baby, of an infant. And people passing by, just regular people stopping to watch and learning something about, how these medical students understand neonatal care and how to pass that information on. So there's just a blossoming when we step into this more relationally sensitive and relationally ethical way of doing research. There's the possibilities for what we do is, beyond the imagination.
Yeah, right. I want to go back to the medical thing and to take it in a slightly different direction, just to play up another part of this. Where does one get the ideas of what there is to do? I mean, where are they coming from? What community does that come out of? And I've been very impressed with a recent article I saw coming out of the medical field, coming out of collaborative medicine,
Mhm.
where this group wanted to know that they serve a community, but inner city community, but they don't quite know what the needs are. So they brought in a whole group of youth and first of all discussed with them what they were trying to find out about, and then got them to try to talk about how they would find that out and work with them to create how to do that research so they could go out and generate those ideas. They did interviews, they did surveys, they did all sorts of stuff and worked together with the medical people in the hospital. So they become an active part of the creation
Yeah.
of what there is that's important within the community. I kind of like that. That was a really,
Yeah.
really
I mean,
lovely.
and going to the population that has the know-how, right? So,
Exactly, exactly.
I remember we were together in Cleveland, I think, for a appreciative inquiry thing once, and I remember one of the students in the program telling a story about doing research in the inner city, in the really impoverished areas of the inner city, and trying to find out what could be done to prevent gang violence, and recruiting gang members
Yeah,
to, in the same way. So
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
there's lesson after lesson of this, and yet, because we live in this, we've grown up in this expert world. The experts do the research. Other people just are users of the research. It's been hard to break that mold and invite. The experts often are not the people who have the degrees or the credentials, right?
Yeah. I want to say one other thing that is really important to me about this, and that is that to me, the relational orientation it's not a matter of perfecting a form of research. It's more of a way of asking questions about how it could be improved or how it could reflect. So, for example, autoethnography to me is very good at trying to express to a community what it's like to, for example,
Mhm.
come out as a homosexual, for example, is one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful in that. But at the same time, what it does is to privilege or make real my experience, my story, my understanding. It sort of creates the me as a sort of separate person who has their own private emotions and private narrative and so on. So, yeah, it doesn't do it there.
Yeah.
Can't have everything all at once. I mean,
Yeah.
if we took everything was action research, there would not be any autoethnography and so on and so on. So it's more a way of trying to say, what are you willing to live with?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, also when I think about autoethnography in particular, I think that that is one of the most challenging uh, new forms of research because from my point of view, it's not just talking about me. It's writing in a way that the talk about me is so resonant with you, the reader. And that's the relational aspect, I think, of autoethnography. But but yeah, I mean, there's always we have to hold on to the idea that we by the very questions we ask or there is no right method, there's no right question, there's no right anything, but the choices we make are kind of fateful, right? They will invite certain kinds of responses and therefore certain kinds of quote unquote results of our research. But we do so, and I think this is key for relational research as we're talking about it. They do so, and we know it's not the truth. This is just one interpretation, and to what use can we put that interpretation? Who will it help? Who might it hinder? And then we go on. And so relational research to me is sort of a never ending and an unfinished
Yeah,
process
yeah,
that it's
yeah.
continually unfolding.
Let me pick that up and take it in the direction of where so much of what we do is within our own culture. And so, for example, we'll use English, and we almost can't help that.
Yeah.
And we're talking to, let's say we're doing action researches with a local group of people and so on. But what if we could think about the relational process as the whole, as more of a global process? How could we, and I don't have an answer to this, it's just like, to me, a next step, how could you bring in larger spans of relational process? So we're speaking now across cultures and nations and so on. So that would be, let's say, an activist research that would be collective,
Yeah.
from varieties of places and varieties of language. And I don't know how that would work, but I think that's really kind
Yeah.
of the next big hurdle is to how to expand the domain of relatedness.
Yeah.
In which,
It reminds me of another opportunity I had many years ago to design and facilitate a several day gathering of leadership from all the Pacific Rim countries. And they each had different problems. Like one had a problem of trash disposal and just had these like boats circling around in the ocean with trash, not knowing where to take it. Another had crime as a problem. Another had sanitation or poverty, all sorts of things. But what they did was they would each present what they had done and were doing to try to solve their own problem, their own country's problem. And it was even though they had different issues that they were dealing with, it was like, oh, that's an interesting idea of how you did that. I'm going to try that in my country with this very different kind of problem. And so it was, I think, a beginning step in sort of these bigger relationships because
yeah,
they were not all focused on one problem. They had their separate problems. What they shared was a geographical location, basically, a very large one. And so there's always that we don't have to share the same problem in order for you to help me resolve mine. That your way of resolving a very different kind of problem may give me a kernel of an idea about resolving some issue I'm trying to resolve. And that's what happened in this group. And I think I saw that as very much expanding the relational domain.
yeah. That's great. No, I was just thinking of there's a mountaintop group of people who live in the mountaintops around the world.
Mm-hmm.
You could have an action research that would involve all the people on the mountaintops through computer co-creation.
Yeah.
Kind of fun to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Things like that, that we have to think more broadly about what we're talking about in terms of the relational
Yeah.
process outside
Yeah.
of our local habitat.
You know, one of the things that I think about also is, you know, people are asking about the future of relational research. And, you know, we sort of have to talk eventually about the academic context because
Oh
that's
yeah,
where
yeah,
research most significantly takes place. And so, or is said to. Um, and you know, I don't know what your experience is, Ken. I'm curious, but I feel in the first decade of this century that there was great innovation and things were really moving and there was a lot of creativity. And then in the second decade, sort of like the foot soldiers came in trying to recontinue, take back the order of, you know, traditional research, and this is all that counts, at least in the academy. And so I feel like, you know, the door was open and a lot of innovation happened, and then the door's trying to be shut. And I think what I would like to see for the future is more of a, you know, push that door open a little bit more and push back. And it doesn't, the only way to do that is to not set it up as an either or, you know, as a dichotomy, you know, oh, that traditional research is bad and this is better. And because that's not the argument we're making. There's nothing wrong with traditional research. It's quite informative often. But it's not the only way to do research. There are multiple ways.
yeah. I think that relationship is important. And it depends on the community. You know, it's there's some areas that I know of where, particularly in sociology, where if you did that old kind of hypothesis testing, measurement, and things, that would be déclassé. It was like,
Mm,
why could you do that? Um, and morally debatable as well,
yeah,
because I go in and measure you and manipulate you and tell you
yeah,
about the nature of the world, exploiting you for my purposes. I mean, there are all sorts of issues there about what you're willing to live with.
right,
But
right.
just to paint the either or, absolutely. I mean, there's a case where the relational process breaks down and becomes competing camps, each with their own agenda. And that would be unfortunate.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about, you know, I had the good fortune of being able to teach a symposium course on addiction with some other colleagues in other disciplines, sociology, history, and humanities. And we had the students do major projects about kind of changing the message about addiction. And they did beautiful work, but the point I want to make is that it was everything that the students did in their projects was completely against sort of the standard research that's done over and over again about addiction, you know, like, you know, what programs work and how, you know, what are the preconditions that make you likely to become addicted to drugs or alcohol and on and on. And instead, they were collecting people's stories, and the stories were so rich and they were doing creative things with it and that allowed for kind of opening up some policymakers to see that if they wanted to, for example, start a needle exchange program, it wasn't statistics that were going to help them push that through the city council or whoever, but rather it was the stories and what helped them and helping what helped them what were um, supportive moves by professionals and community members rather than punishing moves of, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very nice because it does open up that possibility. You get the people sharing their own knowledge in a way that other people can take it on who are in a policy position. Yeah,
You know,
yeah, go ahead.
it's something that I love and I feel sort of underscores all of this. If we take Gregory Bateson's quote, he says, mind is social. And we think about that because oftentimes with social research, we're trying to delve into the minds of individuals and what are they thinking, what are their attitudes, and so forth. So this idea of mind is social really keeps our focus on the process, on what people are doing, and those people are not just people we are studying as researchers, but ourselves as the researchers engaging with participants.
So Sheila and Ken, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives about how you're thinking about research from a relational orientation. I'm just curious, do you have any other words to share with us?
Oh, thanks, Kristen. This has been fun. It's been fun in being in conversation with you, Ken, as well. And I think this project is really fantastic, bringing in so many voices and kind of expanding this idea of what counts as research and giving so much latitude and creativity for those who will tap into this series of videos. So I guess my additional words are congratulations on this project, and I hope everyone will stay in conversation and add to this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Let me just say two things about that. One is that, in fact, the way you're doing this by asking a lot of people in to share their ideas and so on, in itself is kind of an instantiation of the entire project. So, in fact, you're doing it as you're talking about it, which is lovely. The other thing was just a little more gravity to me has to do with it's kind of an ethical issue that if somehow the very idea of ethics and the good emerges from our relationships, the way we conceptualize it, the way we do it, as well as the way in which we destroy each other, then this focus on the relational and what makes that work, how can you make it build it into research, becomes in some sense an ethical project of how we keep humanity alive, how we treat each other in the long run. So and it adds a dimension to this whole idea that I think is terribly important. So I congratulate you on what you're doing. Wonderful.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
including us.
Thank you so much for both of you kicking off this research conversation series. And I just want to acknowledge the Relational Research coordinating team who has built this idea together and has engaged in many conversations already. So people will be able to see over the next coming months new conversations. And so just appreciations to the Relational Research coordinating team and for both of you for kicking this series off. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you to Kristen Bodyford, Ken Gergen, and Sheila McNamee. For more about Ken and Sheila, please visit www.taosinstitute.net/kenneth-j-gergen and www.taosinstitute.net/Sheila-McNamee. Please join in the conversation. What captured your attention in this video? How do you think these ideas reflect a relational orientation to research? Please leave a comment on this YouTube page or join our community at www.taosinstitute.net/relational-research-network. There you can find a lot more information and resources. We thank the Relational Research Network leadership team for the vision and dedication to making this video series come to life.